drinking water and what to do about it. I'm Cliff Tryons, Director of General Public Outreach for the National Groundwater Association. It is my privilege to introduce our presenter, Peter Cartwright, a professional engineer and expert on water treatment, including home water treatment systems. He has had more than 250 clients globally, authored some 200 articles, and presented more than 200 lectures in conferences around the world. During the presentation, feel free to type questions into the question box. At the conclusion of Peter's presentation, he will answer your questions. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Cliff. As he indicated, this webinar is uranium in drinking water and what to do about it. It's one of a series of online training modules prepared and presented by the National Groundwater Association with support from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Uranium is one of a number of naturally occurring products in the ground known as radionuclides. This includes radium, radon, as well as uranium. And we will touch on these other radionuclides in the course of this presentation, but we will be concentrating on uranium. You'll notice that if uranium is ingested, it can primarily cause toxicity in the kidneys, whereas radium is more likely to cause bone cancer and radon lung cancer. But these are all health-related contaminants. As I said, uranium is a naturally occurring metal in the environment, and it, as well as radon and radium, is unique in that it's radioactive. So it has all of the potential issues associated with radioactive materials. Where does uranium come from? Well, as I indicated, it's naturally occurring. It exists in small concentrations in virtually all areas of the United States, and we all ingest or inhale small amounts of natural uranium on a daily basis. In general, the greatest concentrations of uranium are found out in the western part of the U.S. As indicated in the slide, it's the western basin fill aquifers and crystalline rock aquifers in the Rocky Mountains and the Northeast. The geochemical conditions in our soils can affect the degree to which naturally occurring uranium enters the groundwater. It can also result from human activities, primarily mining activities. The maximum contaminant level, which is established by the EPA, and it means the maximum concentration of a particular element that can cause health-related issues when present in drinking water. The MCL, as it's called, is 30 micrograms per liter, or 30 parts per billion, or 0.03 parts per million, if you're more familiar with that terminology. Other contaminants can be also occur in the presence of uranium. As I indicated a few moments ago, it is very commonly associated with the other radionuclides of radon and uranium. Radon is a gas produced by the radioactive decay of radium, which in turn is a byproduct of uranium. These concentrations are so low, and the radioactivity is normally so low, that you can't really buy a test kit to do your own testing. You have to have it done by a qualified laboratory. Now, with regard to the so-called radioactive issues associated with these radionuclides, there are really three kinds. There's the penetrating radioactivity, which results from what's called gamma radiation. These are the rays emitted by radioactive particles that can penetrate the body and cause all sorts of issues that we associate with the term radioactivity. If it's ingested or inhaled, the alpha particles and beta particles that are released by it can cause the health-related contaminants inside the body. Generally, alpha products are very readily removed or prevented from passage by a material as simple as paper. They're very short range or weak particles. So from a radioactive component such as uranium that's releasing radioactivity, even paper will prevent alpha particles from getting through. Beta is particles are a little bit stronger, but even glass or aluminum can prevent their passage. And the gamma rays, which are the most prevalent, the strongest in terms of causing health-related issues with radioactivity, still can be held back or prevented from entering by concrete, lead, or steel. What are the health effects primarily with uranium? We don't have a lot of data. Of course, everybody has heard about the radioactivity associated with uranium, but if it's ingested, it can attack the kidney and cause all sorts of issues, and these are kind of illustrated here. So I guess the important thing is to realize is that uranium as a health-related contaminant is more than just radioactivity that we should be concerned about. It's what it can do specifically inside the body with regard to kidney attack. Now, as I said earlier, you can't measure with a test kit, you can't see it, you can't smell it or taste it. So you really have to have a laboratory analysis done in order to determine it. And if you're having a new well installed or a deeper well installed in your home, if you happen to be in an area where you think that uranium might be an issue or a concern, or if you're a well contractor has indicated this, then you have a couple of choices. Number one is with the help of your contractor, he may be able to drill down to an aquifer where there are little or low or no incidents of uranium present. And as I said, you can do all sorts of things with the contractor to try to utilize his knowledge and experience to help address this potential problem. A second alternative is if there is uranium in your water, you can quite readily remove it with a number of different treatment technologies, which we will go into in a minute. Again, I can't underscore enough the requirement to test your water through a qualified laboratory, one that meets the state or federal qualifications, and they can very readily test for uranium, and they will also tell you if it exceeds the maximum contaminant level for uranium. They can test the presence, and this slide indicates it's about $30 for a specific uranium test. They can also determine its radioactivity component, which is measured in what's called picocuries. That's a little bit more expensive test, but I guess if I were in the position of having uranium in my water, I would want both analyses done. Now, what treatment technologies can be used to lower the concentration or remove significant quantities of uranium? Reverse osmosis under sink units are very, very widely used because they can remove almost all of the different contaminants that are health related in our drinking water. They are very effective. They last for a long period of time, and they will do a very effective job of removing uranium as well as other issues. The normal reverse osmosis unit that we encounter in the industry is the undersink unit. It feeds a specific tap. This, for example, is the tap that is mounted on the sink, usually, normally in the kitchen, and the unit, the pre-filters, the post-filters, and the reverse osmosis membrane unit is mounted below the sink, generally, although it can easily be mounted in the basement too. And there is a storage tank that's required to hold about 2 gallons of water, which is the volume that is maintained so that whenever you open the tap, you'll get as much as 2 gallons of water out of it. You can also have a home reverse osmosis unit, a whole house unit installed, which treats all the water coming into the house. I guess if I were in an area with uranium concentrations above the maximum contaminant level, I would consider a whole house, simply because even though its greatest health issue is related to drinking it, I'd be a little bit concerned about the radioactivity. Ion exchange and even a water softener will remove a certain quantity of uranium. So if the concentration is extremely low, a water softener, which is represented by this, here is the resin tank, here is what's called the brine tank, usually, and this is where the salt is kept, and here are bags of salt used to regenerate the water softener. This is a whole house, or what we call in the industry a point of entry system. You put the softener as the water enters the house, and it treats all of the household water. Distillation can also be used. It's very effective. This would be a point of use. This would be put on a single outlet rather than treating all the house coming treating all the water coming into the house. And what it basically does is boil water. The water turns into water vapor. It condenses and is collected in this product water tank. Distillation is an extremely effective way. It competes effectively with reverse osmosis. However, it requires considerably more maintenance, because this heating chamber, or what they call the boiling chamber, has to be cleaned readily. If you have a lot of hardness in the water, it can scale up pretty badly. So it's pretty much, in my experience, reverse osmosis technology has replaced distillation, but there are still distillers used and available, and they are very effective. So these three technologies are most commonly utilized, and certainly the recommended technologies for reducing the concentration of uranium. One of the problems with uranium is, because it is radioactive, as is radium, for example, when the resin or the membranes require removal or replacement, they may have accumulated enough radioactivity so that they have to be discharged in a hazardous waste landfill, or discharged by an appropriate collection agency. So it isn't just like removing arsenic, for example, where it is not an issue regarding handling. These materials could become radioactive to a significant degree and then require special handling. So for radium, you can use exactly the same technologies. However, you can also oxidize radium as indicated in this third item, and it can be made insoluble, so it can be discharged or removed. But again, for both radium and uranium, they may require special hazardous removal requirements. Radon. Now, radon is a gas. It's the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States behind smoking. It cannot be smelled, tasted, or seen visually. Most of the radon issues come out of the soil, not out of water, but you can have radon in groundwater, and because the National Groundwater Association is involved in groundwater, that's what we're really going to talk about here. But just be aware that a lot of radon can enter a house through a basement, through the soil, and through cracks in the concrete. But for radon in well water, it can be most readily removed by agitation, aeration, and venting. And this is exactly how it can enter the house, as in the water and when taking a shower, or some other area where the activity where the water is agitated. The radon can be released in the air. So radon is primarily an issue with breathing because it's in a gas form. Generally, point of entry or removing radon where it enters the house is the best approach. So, for example, in the storage tank down here in the basement, this is where it should be removed. Granular activated carbon is effective for removing radon. Carbon will do a good job of adsorbing the gas. However, just as with the case of radium and uranium, the removal device can become radioactive. So this can be an issue. Aeration, which in my experience is more commonly used, is a matter of spraying the water into a vented tank or using aeration to bubble air up from the bottom of the tank, and then this air which contains the radon, because as I said, it's primarily an issue because it's a gas, can be vented to the house, to the roof or through the roof. So you're just basically removing the radon and putting it out into the atmosphere. This is a commercially available aeration tank that basically uses a pump and an aeration component in the bottom that bubbles air up through the tank, and then this air that is released is vented out through the roof, through here. Here's another illustration showing whole house venting of the radon. And I might add, this is the most common way of removing it if it comes from the soil up into the house, is they put in a blower in the basement, and they basically move the air out of the basement on a continuous basis and exhaust it into the atmosphere. And there are contractors who do this as a living and are very good at it. With regard to any of the equipment that is used for removing any of these radionuclides we've talked about, uranium, radium, and radon, I think it's extremely important that you only use a product that has been certified with regard to performance characteristics. And the most common certification bodies are National Sanitation Foundation, and they're the organization that really prepares the standards. And then other organizations such as Underwriters Lab or Water Quality Association are qualified to test a given device for these performance standards, and then they will list them and make them available. And any qualified device, and I can't underscore enough the importance of using a qualified device, it will be listed by NSF or WQA or Underwriters Lab. So it's extremely important that you make sure you get something that works. And the NGWA has excellent materials that are available to any well owner or anybody else that's interested. It has a private well owner hotline, and it has a tip sheet, and the website above, www.wellowner.org, can be of great help, or the private well owner hotline. So these are some guidelines. When you have water coming into the house, it's absolutely essential, in my opinion, to have it tested to find out what's in it, what may be of concern. The well contractor or even the testing lab, if it's a local lab, will have a pretty good idea of what issues you may have with your drinking water. What are the standard tests that should be run because of a particular contaminant that may be prevalent, such as uranium or arsenic or one of these other naturally occurring. They may even have a pretty good idea of other health-related contaminants in your area, such as nitrate or something like that. And this wellowner.org website can help answer a lot of these questions with regard to groundwater. I have a very strong personal opinion that water that you have in your home that you can treat if necessary with something like an under-sink reverse osmosis unit is absolutely the best water you can drink. In my opinion, it's more consistent and more reliable than bottled water. So I'm going to turn this back to Cliff now to see if any questions have come in that I can answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, very much for your presentation. We do have questions, and I'm just going to go ahead and launch into them. We have a question about, does it make sense to test my water for all three, uranium, radium, and radon? So I think this person is looking for maybe you to clarify or repeat just what's the best approach to testing to determine if you have a problem with these things. Is it to test for all three automatically or what?
Well, I'm not sure about what the laboratories normally would test for, whether one test would include all three, but if you're concerned about any of these, I would test for all of them just to ensure, because as was indicated in the presentation, they're all chemically related to each other. Radium is a breakdown product of uranium, and radium produces radon. So if you have one, you could very well have two or maybe all three. So yes, I think you want to err on the side of caution, and that's a good cautious approach in my opinion.
Okay, thanks. Another question, the individual says, that's scary that we're breathing and ingesting uranium. What can I possibly do about that? So I think they're referencing the part earlier in your presentation about how it's everywhere and we're getting little bits of it all the time.
Well, and that's true. And I think the problem is that we are breathing and eating and drinking contaminants, huge number of contaminants. The good news is, two good newses, as it were. One is the human body is a wonderful mechanism, and it is generally extremely resistant to normally low concentrations of these contaminants. And number two, these contaminants are generally extremely low in concentration. There's no such thing as water that has no contaminants at all in it, and it's not possible to make water free of any contaminant. All you can do is hope to remove 99.999 or however many digits you want to go of any contaminant. But it used to be in the old days, we thought, oh, water can be made perfectly pure. Well, the more we've been able to test tiny concentrations of contaminants, the more we realize that's not true. And we have the capabilities analytically to measure easily now any contaminant down to parts per trillion. Part per trillion is equivalent to 1 second in 35,000 years. So it's almost beyond comprehension. It's so small. But our drinking water has many, many, many contaminants in that level. The good news is that there's absolutely no proof that most of these contaminants at that concentration are harmful. But I guess I wouldn't worry about it, because the toxicologists that establish these maximum contaminant levels are extremely qualified, and we've got all sorts of checking that's going on all the time for the quality of our water. The issue with a well owner is that if you're a private well owner, by law, the municipality is not required to check your water. So the responsibility is entirely on your shoulders. If your well driller tells you that this is a very stable aquifer and he tells you he doesn't think it's likely to be contaminated in the near future, et cetera, then in many cases, such as with these radionuclides, I think it's probably sufficient to have it tested once and maybe again at the most every year, and maybe not even that frequently. So it isn't something that's probably going to change rapidly, but I certainly would get it tested for. Sorry for the length of the answer.
Oh, that's fine, thank you. Here's a question. What is a greater overall danger to my health? Uranium, radium, or radon? I might just piggyback on that and say, ask if you could answer that question from a locale situation and also just generally in the nation, which seems to be the greatest threat.
Well, that's a good question, and in terms of radioactivity, of course, the radon, I think, is the greatest issue, because every time you take a breath, you potentially could be breathing in some radon, and there are certain parts of the country that have more radon in the soil than others. I happen to live in Minnesota, and that is a slight concern here. Excuse me. If I were in this situation, I want to be concerned. You can go to a hardware store and buy a radon test kit, and it's device that you put down in your basement, and you have to follow the instructions, but you keep it there for like 30 days or something, and then you can send it in and have it analyzed. That will tell you if the radon level in your basement coming from the soil is possibly of concern, and then do something about it. I'm not enough of a toxicologist to say that radon is the greatest issue, and that radon in the soil is the greatest issue. My own personal experience is that I think it is, because it's so ubiquitous, and it's more of a problem coming from the soil than it is coming from the water. If your well contractor indicates that that part of wherever you're living, that area, has a lot of problems with radionuclides, and in my opinion, if you've got uranium in your water, you've probably got some radium, and you probably have some radon, because they're all natural breakdown products. When during radioactivity, this element is breaking down chemically. It's changing structure, and it's going from uranium to radium to radon. So all three of those issues are related. But my own personal feeling is I'm more concerned about the radon in the air than I am about these other contaminants in the drinking water.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. How would I decide whether to use reverse osmosis, ion exchange, or distillation for uranium? So, what tips your decision one way or the other on these three technologies?
Well, I'm a consultant, and as such, I don't sell anything tangible, so I like to feel I'm objective. But my objectivity has been somewhat tainted by the fact that I've been in the membrane industry for 42 years. So I know a lot about membranes, and I think very highly of them. I don't feel my objectivity is clouded in any way, other than the fact that my own personal opinion is, because of its other benefits, an undersink reverse osmosis system is far and away the best technology you can put in your home to ensure that you have the highest quality of drinking water, not just for uranium removal, but for removal of anything that's ionic, anything that has a charge on it, like arsenic, lead, mercury, salt, if it's high in concentration in your area, whatever. These inorganic compounds are removed over 95% efficiently with a reverse osmosis unit. Organic materials, because reverse osmosis units always have an activated carbon filter built into them, they will do an excellent job on removing trace organics too. Reverse osmosis removes the high molecular weight organics, activated carbon removes the low molecular weight organics. So, and of course, these membranes will also remove sediment, but that's not their main requirement. But some people say, oh, well, gee, I've heard that the purity of the RO water is too high, it will extract minerals from your body. Don't believe that. They do not make water too pure, if that's even possible. That's number one. Number two, some of the people who are selling products to compete with RO, such as carbon filters, will say you need the minerals in your drinking water to provide health. That is also not true. A normal human being living in the developed society that we have here gets so much more minerals from their food every day that their body is just releasing, that you do not need your drinking water to provide any sort of nutrition at all. And the final thing I'll say about reverse osmosis is these units are inexpensive. You can go to a DIY store and get an under-sink reverse osmosis unit from, let's say, Home Depot for less than $200, install it yourself, made by General Electric, as good as anything on the market. And the membranes, in my opinion, should last a minimum of 10 years before replacement. Now, having said that, if you're removing uranium or something that's radioactive, that might create a problem to try to keep it in for 10 years. You'd have to talk to probably the laboratory to find out how often the membrane or the filter products need to be changed. But at any rate, as you can tell, I'm a very strong of under-sink reverse osmosis because it does such a wonderful job.
All right, thank you. Here's a question. How soon is it expelled from the body after it's in? So I'm assuming that they're talking about in the case of uranium, the substance and its properties, or I guess in the case, well, I guess with all these it would be the substance and the properties. How soon is it expelled from the body once you breathe it or ingest it?
I can't honestly answer that because I'm not a physician. I'm not a toxicologist. Uranium it is a salt. I don't think it is normally metabolized by the body, but its presence will cause the issue. How fast it is expelled after it is consumed, I don't know. I can't answer that.
Okay. I may ask a follow-up on that. What do you know about the term of exposure to the radionuclide? Is it often the length of time that you either breathe or ingest it that really brings on the problems, or is it the concentration in and of itself, or what do you know about that?
Well, it's actually both. When the EPA establishes these treatment methods and exposure hazards, they base it on what's called CT values, concentration times time. They both play a role, and every one of these contaminants, health-related contaminants, has a different CT. So when they set an MCL, a maximum contaminant level, I think that's their concern is basically instantaneous exposure. In other words, if it exceeds the MCL, you shouldn't consume any of it at any time. But keep in mind, these are all related to what are called the immunocompromised portion of society. These are people that are not healthy people. These are people that are undergoing cancer treatment, that are HIV infected, recovering from surgery, infants, very old people. That's a whole segment of society that is defined as being immunocompromised. And all of these regulations, all of these MCLs are defined, or the numbers are determined based on protecting the immunocompromised component of our society. So but in my opinion, from what I know, the MCL value that they give you means you should not ingest anything with that concentration or above, period.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question which I think is maybe seeking clarification on something you touched on earlier. Does it make more sense to install reverse osmosis for all the water coming into the house instead of each tap? So the well owner has a decision whether they want to just do it at a tap, which I assume would be less expensive if
Yes.
you just did one tap or two, versus all the water coming into the whole house. What about that?
Well, normally, in my opinion, for any contaminant that could be harmful if you ingest it, normally a single tap is sufficient. The people that use these things, use these RO units, normally install them at their kitchen sink, and then they teach their kids to, anytime they drink a glass of water or whenever the family makes coffee or whatever, all of that water for that purpose, culinary and drinking, comes out of that tap. And normally you can get by with just one unit. But for something that has this radioactive component, where the radioactivity, which means just being in the presence of this contaminant, albeit very low concentration, but even then, if I had a significant quantity of uranium in my drinking water, or radium or radon, and it was high enough to be of concern, if I were going to use RO, I would go with a whole house unit. Now you could do things like a double barrier approach, use a water softener to take out the uranium on a point of entry basis, and then get your extra protection by putting in a single tap RO unit. But the thing about uranium and these other radionuclides, because of their radioactivity, I think they take a lot more checking, testing on a more frequent basis. I think that it's more of a point of entry problem because of the radioactivity associated with it. All the other contaminants, in my opinion, do not require this, but certainly the radionuclides do, in my opinion.
Okay. We have a related question. Why not just use ion exchange to treat all the water coming into the house? So, well, is there a time when that would make more sense than the other?
If the concentration of uranium was extremely low, it wasn't close to the MCL, but it was there, it could be measured. It could be that softening will work. You'd have to talk to the supplier, make sure you've got somebody that knew what he was talking about technically, or could refer you to one of the resin manufacturers, because the resin manufacturers are experts in this. You'd have to ensure, number one, that the radionuclide was released during the regeneration of a water softener. There are two kinds of ion exchange units that are normally available. One is what's called a sodium ion exchange unit, which is what a water softener is. It works, the primary chemical used is sodium chloride. But and those will remove uranium, but I'm not sure how well it is released during regeneration. The thing you want to be sensitive to is the accumulation of this over time. Because if you've got very little uranium in your water, but it isn't removed during the regeneration process from the resin, then in time you're going to collect enough radioactivity in that water softener, so it could be a hazard. So I feel that ion exchange in the sodium as a water softener, in the sodium form, it can be effective. You can also use ion exchange resins to remove all of the ionic contaminants, just like reverse osmosis does. But the trouble with them is that they don't throw the removed contaminants down the drain like RO does. It still has to be clean, but its whole basis is a continuous process, so that you're throwing away what you've removed on a constant basis when the unit's operating. With ion exchange, it isn't thrown away, it's collected on the resin bead. So that the reason why you don't see normal ion exchange resins used for residential treatment on a whole house basis is that they would have to be regenerated, and this normally involves removing it and sending it away. They would have to be regenerated, let's say, on a weekly basis or something. So from a operational standpoint, traditional ion exchange technologies are not sufficient. They just are not practical. But certainly the sodium ion exchange process is, because it concentrates, most of its removal is of hardness. The rest of the salts, like sodium, go through. But these resins will also work with some of the contaminants such as uranium. So that's a kind of a side benefit.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. Are you saying that if my water tests positive for radon, so if the water tests positive, should I also, or I should also test the air? So they're asking if they should test the air if the water tests positive.
I would. I'm not an expert on the prevalence of radon in soil if it's in groundwater, but my assumption is, logical standpoint, if you got it in your water, you probably have it in your soil too. Now, if the radon is in very, very low levels of the aquifer, down 500 feet or something like that, it may not be prevalent at the surface, but in the soil. But I would certainly test just to make sure.
Okay, we have a question about cost. How much do these different treatment technologies cost?
Well, because I'm very sensitive to the reverse osmosis industry, I know that a point of use single tap reverse osmosis unit sold by a DIY store is going to be less than $200. I know that for a fact. And I think all the DIY, Lowe's, Menards, Home Depot, they're all obviously about the same price, although they're not all the same manufacturer. I'm not sure about a distiller. I think with a distiller, you'd have to go to a dealer that specializes in them, and you can, of course, your water conditioning dealer, that's probably the second largest product they sell is reverse osmosis units. So any of your local water distributor, water conditioning dealer can supply a single tap reverse osmosis unit. Many of them also carry distillers. Of course, they all carry water softeners. That's their main line of business. Most of them do not readily sell whole house reverse osmosis units, but they can all get them, particularly if they deal in commercial and industrial markets. Those units are virtually the same as what would be sold to a whole house. So my gut feeling on and keep in mind, for all intents and purposes, you cannot buy a whole house distiller. It's always a single tap or the equivalent of a single tap. My guess is that these distillers are in the neighborhood of $300 to $400, but I'm not. They are so rarely sold in my experience that I don't see them very often.
And do you have any idea of generally of a range of cost on the whole house RO or the whole house ion exchange? Well,
of course, the whole house RO, it looks like it's somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000. A little bit more extensive and a lot more expensive because you have to basically have a storage tank. You generate the water. You run the water, the whole house water through the membrane system, and then you have to collect it and store it, because it isn't like a water softener. It's not a demand process. It produces pure water at a certain rate, and that's it. You can't vary it like you can a water softener. Water softeners, because they are only whole house, they're sold by the dealers. I know that, or my guess is that the DIY store like Home Depot, I know they sell water softeners, and my guess is they're in the $500 to $600 range. So you can get this water softening ion exchange technology for that. I think it would be virtually impossible to buy a standard deionizer, one that will remove all of the ionic contaminants from water. It would be very difficult to find that anything short of an industrial or medical application. So it's really not a choice. Your choice for whole house are either a water softener or a reverse osmosis unit. But for the point of use single tap, you have the RO, and you can get some companies do sell a deionizer for a single tap. But again, it takes out all of the ions, not just uranium. And of course, I've already talked about distillers. They are only available as a single tap unit.
Okay, I have one more question, but if there are any viewers out there that have a question, you still have time to type it in your question box and send it. And then after we're done with the questions, I'll tell you how to download the handout of this presentation. So the last question I have right now is, are the treatment systems difficult to maintain? So I guess they're trying to figure out, what's involved in trying to maintain one of these systems.
Good question. Let's start with a point of entry, because your primary choice is a water softener. Water softeners, typical water softener, where you're not trying to remove something like uranium, they will last for 20 years probably, easily. The resins are long-lived. The system is simple in the way it operates, as long as you keep sodium chloride in there. But again, the caveat that I would call your attention to is the fact that this resin could become radioactive in time. You'd have to talk to, if your well contractor or the water conditioning dealer you're working with knows about this issue of uranium. They can probably give you some good advice as to how often the resin should be tested for radioactivity, because you don't want something that's radioactive down in your basement. Whole house RO could be the same thing, but it's pretty rare to have a whole house RO. It's much less common than your water softener. But there you'd have to worry about the membranes, because membranes become fouled, and the same applies to the point of use, the single tap RO. Membranes eventually become fouled, and when the fouling materials contain a radioactive substance, then that means that the membranes are becoming radioactive. So again, talk to the contractor, talk to the water conditioning dealer you may be working with. If you're in an area where, for example, uranium is a problem, and you go to a DIY store in the area, they may even have experience with it. But as I said earlier, the RO membranes should reject salts for a minimum of 10 years. The pre-filter, now, if you've got groundwater, you probably don't have a lot of sediment, so the pre-filters should not require changing very frequently. The carbon filters, because there's no chlorine in the water, and I'm assuming that the water is fairly free of human contaminants, like aromatic hydrocarbons or something, and probably not a lot of humic or fulvic acids, naturally occurring organics. Because well water is pretty pristine as far as suspended solids and dissolved organics, the pre-filters should last equally long. But again, my only admonition is to make sure that these components do not pick up radioactivity. The distiller, same thing. The scaling material, if that's cleaned regularly, then that probably should last a long time. But make sure that you properly dispose of whatever is cleaned out of the the boiling chamber. And I think I've answered that completely.
I think that does it. So we have come to the end of this webinar, and for those who are still there, if you look to the right, probably on the right of your screen where the little panel is, there is a little horizontal bar that says handouts, and below that you should see a hyperlink that you can click on to download this PowerPoint. And if you have any questions about that, you can email me. I'll give you my email address. It's CT as in Tom, REY, N as in Nancy, S as in Sam. So that's CTREYENS at ngwa.org. So we want to thank everyone for participating. We want to thank you, Peter, for your cogent, insightful presentation. And yes.
Let me interrupt one moment, and that is, and I think on the other webinars it's been included, but I certainly encourage anybody that's got a question for me to email me also. And maybe the way I'll leave it is that, Cliff, if somebody contacts you and wants to talk to me, would you please provide my contact information?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. I will give them your contact information for any questions you might want to get from the real expert, Peter. So we want to thank everyone for participating. We will also have this webinar available, a recorded version of it, probably within days, if you want to share that with anybody else you know. So with that, we want to thank everyone for participating and have a good afternoon.